Welcome in. President Trump had a tense meeting with Senate Republicans today. It came hours after Trump suddenly canceled a signing ceremony for newly passed housing affordability legislation that had bipartisan support. We heard reaction from two Republican senators, Bill Cassidy and John Cornyn, after that meeting wrapped up.
The president didn't want to hear my question, interrupted me. I didn't care to be interrupted. I felt like I was trying to get answers for the American people. And I'm not going to be bullied when I'm trying to get answers for the American people. And so it escalated from there. At some point, it de-escalated.
We're told the president called you a lunatic?
Can I imagine that the president called me things that would be said on the playground? Yeah, I can imagine that.
The president closed by preaching unity, but he spent the prior hour talking about things which were not exactly unifying.
CBS News congressional reporter Torian Small has the latest now from Capitol Hill.
What's good, people? Dr. John Podcast is back again. This week, over 70 lawmakers, including sitting senators, openly called for the president's removal, with one filing formal articles of impeachment and others invoking the 25th Amendment on the record. The shift marks a dramatic escalation from standard political combat to constitutional emergency measures. Let me take you inside what actually triggered this unprecedented response. The United States and Iran have been locked in a war for months now. It came down to a standoff over the Strait of Hormuz, this absolutely critical shipping channel that the world depends on. The president gave Iran a hard deadline, make a deal by 8 o'clock that night or else. And then on Tuesday morning, he went on social media and posted something that stopped the entire country cold. He wrote that a whole civilization would die that night, never to be brought back again.
It was a contentious day on the Hill, and at the center of it, President Donald Trump. Just moments before heading to a Senate Republican lunch, the president canceled a signing of a landmark bipartisan housing bill, holding it hostage for his national voter ID law, the Save America Act. Inside that meeting was fireworks. Senator Bill Cassidy went toe-to-toe with the president for signing on to the Iran War Powers Resolution. The president asked him flat out, why would he sign that? And he stood up and said, if you really want to know, it's because the American people had no idea about his plan. Senator Cassidy confirming to CBS News that the president rubbed salt in the wounds by bringing up the fact that he lost his primary. But outside of their spat, we heard from leader John Thune, who was a bit more diplomatic, but his response was telling. He said that the president talked solely about the SAVE Act and his opinion, but as he stated this time and time again, Republicans in the Senate do not have the votes for its passage.
A whole civilization, let that sink in for a moment. The President of the United States in a public post openly threatening to wipe an entire nation of more than 90 million people off the map. This came right after days of him threatening to blow up bridges and power plants and civilian infrastructure over there. The kind of thing that experts, world leaders, and even the Pope warned could amount to actual war crimes. This was not a slip of the tongue. It was a written, deliberate threat, and it broke something loose. The reaction was instant and massive. Within hours, the dam burst. More than 70 lawmakers came out one after another, demanding the president be removed through one of two roads. Road 1, impeachment. The House votes to impeach.
Moving forward, we know that Speaker Mike Johnson and the president will continue the conversation Thursday at the White House. Back to you.
I want to bring in New York Times congressional correspondent Robert Jimison. So, Robert, President Trump getting in a shouting match with some Republican senators, and this comes amid other tensions surrounding the Iran war and the filibuster. What can you tell us about the disconnect?
Well, I can tell you from what I was told that the president came into this meeting extremely angry. You could tell, senators told me that he had a number of grievances from members within his own party. Like you mentioned there, the Iran war was high on his list. He brought up old legal disputes, had the possibility of him being indicted, judge nominations, all sorts of, he came in just with a laundry list. But there was a real disconnect between members who were telling the president, we're trying to get your agenda accomplished, but it seems at multiple turns, the White House and the president himself are making it harder for Senate Republicans to do the will of the president in the legislative body. You're looking at national security, FISA.
The Senate votes to convict and remove. Road 2, the 25th Amendment, where the vice president and the cabinet declare the president unfit and unable to do the job. And we are not just talking about backbenchers firing off angry posts. We are talking senators. Senator Ed Markey said Congress needs to come back into session and either impeach and remove him or invoke the 25th. Senator Chris Murphy said no president in control of his senses would publicly promise to wipe out an entire civilization. These are big names with strong words. And again, one member, Congressman John Larson, actually filed the impeachment articles. So this is not just talk. There's paper, there's a process, there's a real move being made on the board.
The delay there. You're looking at the Iran war, gas prices going up for Americans all over the country. These are things that, these Republican senators have to go back to their states and try to sell to the American voter. And the longer that this goes on, the harder it is to sell those things.
Sure. So a number of GOP senators will not be returning to Capitol Hill after losing their primaries. So could we see more pushback as they finish out their terms?
I think yes, you're going to see more what we like to call untethered lawmakers who, don't have to subvert themselves to the president, no longer rely on him to get a base of voters. They've already lost their elections. They're kind of, free agents, so to speak, from now until they leave office when the next class is sworn in January. But you're also starting to see more Republicans who are returning or hope to return next session, starting to chafe a little bit more. I think, like I mentioned there, the affordability issue is big here. And I think a key thing to pay attention to, the president very quickly scrapped what was supposed to be a huge win for Republicans, this bipartisan housing bill to bring down the cost of housing.
But here's where I have to be straight with you, because a lot of channels are going to lie right to your face about this. Is the president actually about to get hauled out of the Oval Office? No, not even close. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Because the math just isn't there. Removing a president is incredibly hard. And that's by design. It takes enormous majorities that simply do not exist right now. So here's the real tension of this whole story. And it is genuinely fascinating. You've got the most serious get him out now talk of his entire second term. And at the very same time, almost no realistic chance of it actually happening in the immediate future. So which is it? A real threat to his presidency or just a symbolic tantrum? And the answer is it's both.
Something that universally speaks to so many voters, no matter their political alignment. Republicans were hoping that that would get them on track to moving ahead in this message that Republicans are the affordability party going into November. The president immediately discarded that, canceled the signing ceremony, canceled the whole photo op, and turned to other issues that have been plaguing the Republican Party and plaguing Senate Republicans for weeks now. National security, the war in Iran, and those things are linked to the affordability issues that, people are still expressing concerns over. The cost of gas, the cost of food, fertilizer in more rural states and farming communities. And so Republicans are telling me, look, we're trying to do everything that the president wants. We're trying to push his agenda. We're trying to be the legislative wing of this movement that sent him and all the Republicans unified control in Washington barely 2 years ago. But they're struggling. And the big struggle, ironically, is the president himself. And it's very hard for these Republicans I've spoken to make sense of exactly what is the goal of the president here and why does he seem to be cutting off Republicans at the nose.
And that is exactly what makes it matter. Because the fact that senators are even saying these words out loud is itself the story. That aura of total invincibility he's always had, it just cracked. If you've been paying attention, you know this didn't come out of nowhere. We've seen the Iran war escalate. We've seen him purge his own top generals in the middle of that war. We've seen the swirl of questions around his health and his fitness for the job. And now it is all crashing together into one giant question that Washington is suddenly forced to confront. Is this president fit to keep the job? And what can anyone actually do about it? Let me lay out exactly what happened because the details matter a lot here. The backdrop is the war with Iran, which had already dragged on for months. It boiled down to this flashpoint over the Strait of Hormuz. Iran had reportedly choked off or threatened that shipping lane, and the president wanted it reopened. So he set a deadline, 8 o'clock that Tuesday night. And in the lead up, his rhetoric got darker and darker over the weekend and into Monday. He was threatening to hit bridges, power plants, and civilian infrastructure inside Iran. And here's the thing, deliberately targeting civilian infrastructure is exactly the kind of act that international law experts say can cross the line into war crimes. Then came Tuesday morning and the post that lit the fuse. A whole civilization would die that night and never come back. The head of the United Nations, without naming him, basically said no military goal on earth justifies the wholesale destruction of a society or the deliberate suffering of civilians. The Pope condemned it. And then, plot twist, less than 90 minutes before his own deadline, the president suddenly announced a 2-week ceasefire. He pulled back, but the threat was already out there in black and white, and you cannot unring that bell. Now here's where the floodgates truly open. Once that post went up, the calls for removal came in waves. More than 70 lawmakers, all demanding he be removed one way or another. Senator Markey said the president is unstable and a clear and present danger not just to America, but to the entire world. Congressman Rana said every single member of Congress should be calling for removal under the 25th Amendment because threatening war crimes violates the Constitution and the Geneva Conventions. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said flat out that the president must be removed, that we are playing with the brink. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar said, invoke the 25th, impeach, remove. Even Nancy Pelosi said he should be removed one way or another. And then there's the concrete action. Congressman John Larson didn't just post about it. He formally filed articles of impeachment citing both the civilization threat and an earlier profane holiday post. Another member, Congressman Shri Thanadar, sent a letter straight to the vice president and the cabinet begging them to invoke the 25th. So this was not vague venting. This was a coordinated, on-the-record push. And it wasn't only coming from politicians either. It was bubbling up from the ground. Congressional offices got absolutely flooded. One lawmaker said her district office took 257 calls in a single day, the most they had ever logged. Another said the phones literally would not stop ringing. People were calling in scared. The public was demanding action, and their representatives were responding. Let me now break down how this removal stuff would actually work in plain English, because most people have no idea. There are two paths. Path one is impeachment. The House of Representatives needs a simple majority to impeach, which is basically a formal accusation. But then it goes to the Senate, and to actually remove him, you need 2/3 of the Senate to convict. 2/3. That is a massive bar. Path 2 is the 25th Amendment, Section 4. And this one is wild because it doesn't even start with Congress. It starts with the vice president and a majority of the cabinet declaring the president unable to do his job. Power transfers to the vice president immediately. And then if the president fights it, which he obviously would, it goes to Congress, and you need 2/3 of both chambers to keep him out. And here's the kicker. That 25th Amendment path has never once been used to remove a president. Not ever in history. Now here's where I have to flip the script and tell you the part that a lot of people really don't want to hear. Because when folks see 70 lawmakers screaming, remove him, their brain goes, oh wow, this is happening, he's done. And I'm sorry, but no, it is not happening right now. And here's exactly why. Republicans control both the House and the Senate. So an impeachment that actually removes him would need a big chunk of Republicans to turn on their own president. And there is zero sign of that. On top of that, the Democratic leaders themselves wouldn't even fully back the removal calls. Hakeem Jeffries, the top House Democrat, basically said they ruled nothing in and nothing out. Chuck Schumer stopped short too. They steered everyone toward the war powers fight instead. As for the 25th Amendment, that requires the vice president and the cabinet to turn on him. And that very same day, the vice president was standing on a stage overseas praising the president. So the people who would actually have to pull the trigger are completely loyal to him. Even one Democratic senator admitted the bar is just too high to clear right now and that they'd have to win this the old-fashioned way. Translation, at the ballot box, not in a removal vote. So if it's such a long shot, why am I making a whole video about it? Great question, because here's the thing. A demand that can't pass right now can still completely change the game. Think about it like this. For 16 straight months, most Democrats had carefully avoided the whole removal conversation. They wanted to talk about prices and kitchen table stuff, not impeachment. They held the line on purpose. And then one single post blew that restraint to pieces. Suddenly, senators, actual senators, are saying he's unfit and should be removed with their names on it out in the open. That is a massive shift in the temperature of the entire country. It chips away at this whole idea that he's untouchable, that his presidency is just an unstoppable force of nature. It sends a signal to voters, to allies overseas, and yes, even to nervous people inside his own administration that the constitutional emergency exits exist and people are eyeing them. And once that genie is out of the bottle, it does not go back in. The word removal is now part of the conversation permanently. Now, in fairness, because I always give you both sides, let's talk about how the other side responded because it genuinely matters. First, the Republicans. And here's the honest truth. No sitting Republican actually joined the call to remove him. A few did criticize the rhetoric. Senator Ron Johnson said he was hoping and praying the whole thing was just bluster and that he didn't want to see civilian infrastructure getting blown up. A couple of House Republicans called the "wipe out a civilization" line reckless. But one of them argued the president was simply negotiating Trump style, playing hardball to force a deal. Notably, one prominent former MAGA congresswoman did float the 25th Amendment. But the bottom line is the wall of Republican support basically held. In the White House, they came out swinging. The press secretary defended the post completely, arguing it was a very strong threat that actually forced Iran to cave and agree to the ceasefire. A White House spokesperson called the removal push pathetic, saying Democrats have wanted to impeach him since before he was even sworn in. So their whole argument is this was not a meltdown, it was strategy. It worked. Stop clutching your pearls. Yet here's what makes this moment even more dangerous for the president. The removal talk is not happening in isolation. It's landing right on top of another huge blow. Because around this same stretch, the Senate did something they had failed to do 9 separate times before. It actually passed a resolution 50-48, telling the president to stand down on the Iran war and come to Congress. Then here's the kicker. 4 Republicans crossed the aisle to vote against their own president on that one. 4. That might not sound like a lot, but in this Senate with this president, it is a flashing red warning sign. For years, his grip on his party was basically total. Nobody crossed him. And now on war and peace, the single most serious thing there is, the cracks are showing. So put it all together. You've got senators rebuking him on the war. You've got senators questioning his fitness. You've got more than 70 lawmakers calling for his removal. That is a 1-2-3 punch, all landing in the very same window. And whether or not any of it succeeds, it tells you the ground is shifting under his feet. The fear is fading. And for a president who runs on the idea that he is untouchable, that is a genuine problem. The president reportedly came into a meeting extremely angry. Senators told reporters that he had a number of grievances from members within his own party. The Iran war was top of his list. He brought up old legal disputes. He seemed to realize that some of his allies no longer need to rely on him to get a base of voters. They've already lost their elections. They're kind of free agents, so to speak, from now until they leave office when the next class is sworn in. But you're also starting to see more Republicans who are returning or hope to return next session starting to chafe a little bit more. The loyalty that was once absolute is becoming conditional. This is a significant development because it shows that the president's hold on his party is not as strong as it once was. For years, Republicans were terrified of crossing him. They knew that his base was loyal to him, not to them. They knew that if they defied him, they would face primary challenges and lose their seats. But now, some of them are already on their way out. They have nothing to lose, and others are starting to calculate that their political futures might be better served by distancing themselves from him rather than embracing him. That's a dangerous calculus for any president. Let me break this whole thing down nice and clean. Here's what we actually know. The president posted a threat to wipe out a whole civilization in Iran ahead of a deadline. More than 70 lawmakers, including multiple senators, responded by calling for him to be removed from office through impeachment, through the 25th Amendment, or both. One congressman formally filed impeachment articles. The president then pulled back and announced a 2-week ceasefire, but the calls for removal kept coming anyway. Meanwhile, the votes to actually remove him do not exist. Republicans control Congress, the cabinet is loyal, and even Democratic leaders won't fully sign on. So it is the most serious removal talk of his entire second term, and it is also almost certainly not going to succeed right now. Both of those things are true at the very same time. So now, why does any of this actually matter beyond the drama? Let me give you the big reasons one by one. Reason number 1, the line moved, and lines do not move back easily. For more than a year, removal was basically a forbidden word in serious Washington circles. Too risky, too divisive, bad politics. And in a single day, that taboo just evaporated. Once a sitting senator stands up and says the president is unfit and must be removed with their name attached, you cannot unsay it. It's on the record forever, and it gives cover to the next person and the one after that. That's how these things snowball. It normalizes a conversation that used to be completely off limits. Now, does that mean removal's coming? No. But it does mean the political reality has shifted under everyone's feet. The president is no longer operating in a world where everyone just assumes he's untouchable and acts accordingly. He's now operating in a world where the most powerful people in the country are openly discussing how to get rid of him. And that changes how everyone behaves. Allies, opponents, donors, even members of his own administration. The psychology of the whole thing is different now, and psychology in politics is everything. Reason number 2, and this is the one to actually watch. The real removal lever isn't this week, it's the midterm elections this coming November. And here's the wild part. The president knows it. Back in January, at a Republican retreat, he flat out predicted that if his party loses the midterms, the Democrats will impeach him again. He said it himself out loud. He sees it coming. So connect the dots. Right now, removal can't pass because Republicans control Congress. But if Democrats flip the House in November, suddenly impeachment becomes very real because the House only needs a simple majority. Now, even then, removal would still require 2/3 of the Senate to convict, which is a giant hurdle. So I'm not telling you a flipped House automatically means he's gone. It does not. But it would transform this whole conversation from symbolic to deadly serious overnight. Those impeachment articles that just got filed, one congressman even hinted they could be teed up and ready for the next Congress. So this week's drama is really just a preview. The actual showdown is on the ballot in November. That is the date that matters most. And here's a wrinkle in all of this that's worth sitting with for a second. Because every single one of these removal paths leads to the exact same place. Vice President J.D. Vance becomes president. That's just how it works. If the president is impeached and removed or declared unfit under the 25th, the vice president steps right up. So when people demand removal, what they're really asking for is a Vance presidency. And that's part of why this is so politically tangled. Some of the very people calling loudest for removal might not actually love what comes after it. And it's also a big reason the 25th Amendment path is so far-fetched, because for it to work, Vance himself would have to be willing to move against the president and take the job. And nothing about how he's behaving suggests he's anywhere near that. The same day all of this blew up, he was overseas singing the president's praises. So the mechanism that was supposedly designed to remove the president depends entirely on the loyalty of the one man who benefits most from it. And right now, that loyalty looks absolutely rock solid, which tells you just how unlikely this really is in the immediate term. Reason number 3, and I have to be really careful and really honest with you here, the question of the president's fitness, his stability, his judgment, his capacity for the job, is now squarely in the mainstream political conversation. Senators are using words like unstable and unfit out loud on the record. The 25th Amendment, which is specifically about whether a president is capable of doing the job, is being openly debated. That's a big deal. But here's the discipline you absolutely have to keep. The line between honest analysis and pure garbage. These are political and constitutional accusations. They are not a medical diagnosis. No doctor has declared anything. These are senators making a political and legal argument based on his public words and behavior. And critically, the only people who can actually invoke that 25th Amendment are the vice president and the cabinet, and they show absolutely no sign of agreeing. They're standing right beside him, and the White House completely rejects the entire premise. So please don't let anyone on either side tell you this is somehow settled. A demand to remove him is not the same thing as proof that he's unfit. It's a fight, a very loud, very public fight, but just a fight. So here's the honest bottom line on where this actually stands, cutting through all the noise from both directions. On one side, you've got channels screaming that the president is about to be frog-marched out of the White House any second now. That is fantasy. It is not happening tomorrow. The math forbids it. Don't get played by that. But on the other side, you've got people waving the whole thing away like it's nothing, like it's just Democrats being Democrats again. And that's wrong too, because more than 70 lawmakers and multiple senators publicly calling to remove a sitting president, with one of them filing actual articles after he threatened to wipe out an entire nation, that is not nothing. That is a genuine historic escalation. So the truth lives right in the uncomfortable middle. It's real and it's serious and it's also not imminent all at the same time. And anybody who tells you it's only one or the other is either lying to you or trying to sell you something. Hold both ideas in your head at once. That is how you actually understand this story. So what do you actually watch from here? A few things. First, watch the Democratic leadership. Right now, they're holding back, steering toward the war powers fight instead of removal. If leaders like Jeffries ever actually get behind impeachment, that's a real shift. Second, watch the cabinet and the vice president. They are the only ones who can pull the 25th Amendment trigger. So if you ever see even a hint of one of them wavering or breaking from the president, that is enormous. Drop everything news. Third, watch that fragile Iran ceasefire because it is shaky. And if the war reignites and the threats start back up again, this entire removal firestorm comes roaring right back, probably worse than before. And fourth and biggest of all, watch November. The midterms are the real test. The moment this all stops being symbolic and starts being genuinely possible. Everything between now and then is just positioning. The actual battle is at the ballot box. Here's my honest take. And yeah, this part is just me. This is opinion. I think the president is safer right now. The numbers protect him, the cabinet protects him, and his party is mostly still holding the wall. He survived impeachment twice in his first term, and the smart money says he survives this wave too. But I also think something real and lasting just happened. The spell broke. The idea that he's invincible, that nobody would ever dare move against him, took a serious hit this week. And the midterms are now hanging over absolutely everything like a storm cloud that he can clearly see rolling in. So the real story here isn't that he's about to be removed. It's that for the first time in this term, getting rid of him went from unthinkable to a thing serious people say out loud. Don't buy the fantasy that he's gone tomorrow, but don't sleep on how much the ground just shifted either.